Have you heard of theories of change, theory of change or theories of change models? Okay, there is also something called theory of change. There is also something called as theory driven inquiry. Okay, so let me not create too many confusions, but these are the three main schools. So this is another one, theory driven evaluation, and the last one is realist evaluation, realist synthesis. The common thread here is this process, what we just did. This whole thing of what is the logic, why will it work, what will work. This is the first step. All of these approaches start with that first step, that there is a theory guiding programs and policies. If it is not explicit, it has to be made explicit. That is the idea. Theories of change is a very sort of mechanistic application of this process. So it's a bit like this. It's a very management oriented approach. Like for example, your log frames is somewhat this is the first thing you recall. Yeah, so it's a bit, actually log frames, I mean, let's not pretend log frames are actually useless or something. Log frames, if well framed, formulated, can be a very useful management tool. They're extremely useful, and the theory of change approach recognizes that. So what are the resources and inputs? If you have access to those resources, then what will you accomplish? And if you accomplish all those activities, what are the outputs that will come? And if those outputs happen, what extended outcome will happen, and the impact. I think you are all quite familiar with this terminology, but this leads to this kind of program logics. Okay, lot of boxes and arrows. Let's not start reading what is inside those boxes or what that program is about, but suffice it to say that theory of change is an interesting implementer tool, right? For example, if you are implementing the zero prescription policy, it helps you to say, okay, what is my starting, why will my program work, what activities will I have, what will that activity lead to, and have these boxes and arrows and question, will it happen or not. And if any policy develops this detailed sort of boxes and arrows, then we as an evaluator, what do? How do we build our evaluation now? Suppose we already have this. We start looking here. So did active participation happen? Maybe we will make a survey. Inclusive community decision making. How will you look at inclusiveness? Maybe we will do an interview here. So it's method neutral. All of these approaches are method neutral in the sense that you choose your tool, whether you will do a survey, an interview, an observation, non-participant, participant, etc. based on what you are trying to look at. Inclusiveness, if you want to look, maybe you will do an in-depth interview like that. So that is how the theory of change approach proceeds. We are not spending too much time on this. Suffice it to say that, does it get us far enough to how? Probably not. It will not get you to how. It will get you to understanding why a program worked or why a program failed, right? It will try and explain to you where it worked, where it did not work. That's it. Is it sufficiently embracing complexity and dynamism of social systems? Again, probably not. And we will see to what extent realist evaluation does. We have still not gone there. Does it explore the inherent human tendencies to differ in responses given conditions, histories and situations? Does it? The previous log frame type of approach, does it do that? It doesn't, right? So that's the major critique basically of the theory of change approach. We have already covered this here. What we did here is program theory building. So when we say program theory, what we are seeing is these are prosaic, everyday theories that are concerned with how social problems are generated and how programs function. Okay, so that's a bit what we were trying to do here. They include beliefs of program actors and not grand theories. And the question that you were asking earlier, Sumega, which is about also borrowing from a larger pool of knowledge of how people or why people also make changes. For example, social exclusion is also a possible theory. The fact that certain people for various structural conditions in society get left behind. So when you are evaluating a program, you may say, okay, I will look at the beliefs of program actors, but I will take a social exclusion lens and see does that explain what kind of structural conditions existed in the society that prevented people from benefiting from this program, So then you can build that into your program theory. So the program theory is a testable hypothesis and it's the basis for testing assumed causal chains. So we as an evaluator make assumptions. For example, if I come to the management training of training clinicians to become better managers, right, which is an assumption. So maybe one of the causal in the causal chain from trained manager to a capacitated manager is an intention to make change, perhaps. So did I, for example, already have an intention to make the change in the way I am doing things in my organization, and then did your training program give me that resource for me to make changes. So then I will say, okay, in my program theory I will say intention to make change is an important intermediate step in this training program, and then I will ask into larger theory what creates positive intentions to change organizations or to change structures, right, and then I may come upon various reasons, maybe organizational commitment, maybe theories of motivation, ultimately it leads to theories, right, which I incorporate into the program theory. Don't worry, I will illustrate all of this in one example eventually in the last I will take you from one beginning to end. Yeah, so basically what we do is we try to understand the contribution of an intervention to the observed results. We can never pretend that in social systems that an intervention caused something to happen, but rather what we can explore is did ASHA program contribute to whatever the outcome that you are trying to look at, and identifying and assessing any significant context factors. This is something that we talked about. So basically, where did this come about? Actually, just a quick historical perspective. There was this huge movement of social engineering in the United States when evaluation of programs was, there was a huge tilt towards experimental and quasi-experimental design. This is from the literature. What I know is during the Lyndon Johnson era, where there was a heavy focus for everything to be scientifically evaluated, and science was framed as trials, right? It was framed as, so any program has to undergo trials, experimental trials, to show that it works or doesn't work. So and there was of course this response to that, where it was framed that programs are also very political. You cannot have trials. So it created this sort of a war, a clash between two opposite schools of thought on how program evaluation has to be done. So one school of thought on the left side clearly in favor of internal validity, right, where you look at the classical triad: temporal association, covariation, and non-spuriousness. The three classical things in things. Is there a time association? Did the effect come after the cause first? Second, do they co-vary? If I increase the cause, will the effect also increase? And finally, is there no other alternate explanation between the cause and the effect? So the drive to control conditions and eventually show that program A leads to outcome A, right? So there are a bunch of methods, evaluation methods inspired by that approach, and others who looked at field trials, large trials, observing people change behaviors over time. So basically the idea was in theory driven inquiry was to try and incorporate both kinds of validity. In some sense it is not easily possible, but the idea was to try and see, to try and get to analytical generalizability. Basically, what kind of a middle range theory can we come about as to programs work in what kind of conditions, rather than saying that programs work or programs do not work, that sort of thing. Yeah, both the earlier schools which inspired theory driven inquiry clearly look for statistical causes, both of them, right? So one of them is looking at conducting trials first and proving that something happens, or finding a grand unified law, and the other is looking at finding a law that explains within this place where I did my intervention. So evaluating the intervention in its setting or full generalizability to large population. These were the two oppositional schools, where theory driven approaches tried to say, okay, let us not get caught in does it work definitely there? Did it work there, or will it work for everyone? But what works for whom and under what conditions? That's how this what works for whom and under what conditions comes. It tries to say programs do not work for everybody on one hand, and they don't do absolutely nothing on the other hand. So what's the middle ground is what the theory driven school took up. And finally come to, in practice, if you were to do a theory driven evaluation, these are the steps. Firstly, assessing the appropriateness of the approach. So theory driven approaches are helpful if you are talking of human behavioral changes. If your interventions are hinging a lot on individual practice, if it's hinged a lot on that, you could take it. Where would you not take it up? Large scale policy analysis, macro policy analysis, right? For example, this space, the global pharma, whatever, how the global pharma is influencing individual doctor practice is not so much amenable. So in a theory driven thing, we are somewhat in a testing frame. We make this sort of a framework, a theory, we go back, test, refine, come back, reformulate it, go back, test it. So it is coming from a particular philosophical approach of science called critical realism, where we are saying that, and this is a paradigm, and you have to really reflect within and see firstly whether you buy into this. And this is very important when we choose also I feel it's important when we choose the HPSR lens. What is my own position on how knowledge is generated, on how reality is, which is basically the ontology and the epistemology. How reality is the ontology, how knowledge is generated is epistemology. So in the realist view, what we say is that reality, there is a deeper reality which is somewhat universal. That's what this whole thing of mechanism is. Why we are saying mechanism is because we feel that there is some underlying fairly universal human tendency which may or may not manifest given the context, right? So it makes it epistemologically positivist, right? Ontologically positivist, right? Let me explain that. First I will explain the realist view. Realist view is that what we see is empirical. No, what we see is here at the first level. Like for example, we see for example that JSY leads to increased coverage in one place and does not in another, right? So below this is the field of empirical, where they say that you can, through clearly organizing how things are, you can go to another deeper level where you can have some analytical generalizability. So some patterns, so this is the level of patterns. So here we are saying that some people choose to take JSY incentives and others do not. What works for whom and under what conditions is at this level. So a realist worldview, we say there is a deeper level which is the real, which is fairly universal. So there, if a person had the structures and conditions where things could have happened positively, if we were able to trigger those mechanisms, then for anybody this will work. So this is an ontological position that critical realism takes, that there is a layered reality, and through deep investigation we can reach there, we can find these universal mechanisms. Okay. So for example, let me explain. For example, let me explain the epistemology, how realist knowledge is generated. Realists will say knowledge is generated in a relativist sphere. That means that irrespective of all this reality, there are different world views, right? So it acknowledges that you cannot, for example, measure all of this and then like in a positivist frame find associations and then make causations. The epistemology means how can we know? See, remember, ontology means the nature of reality. Epistemology is how can we know about that nature. So here realist people would say that knowledge is relativist. knowledge that we share, perspectives that we have, worldviews that we have differ. So it's not that, for example, we can make judgments on what is true, what is correct and what is wrong. And that's where the whole qualitative inquiry forms a central component of realist approach. I think the takeaway, okay, let's not make too much of this ontology and epistemology. The takeaway is that these HPSR lenses are not just technical tools. There is this underpinnings, there is this basis, there is this philosophy of science on which they are based. So if we choose one of them, that's enough actually, if you acknowledge that. And especially the fact that most HPSR lenses will either say it doesn't matter whether there is an actual reality or not, or that they acknowledge that there is an actual reality, but what we see and what we hear and where we live is relativist. I think that much is enough. If you in your future professional careers choose one of these lenses, I think you should delve deeper in that lens. If you are not, for example, going to be doing evaluation work, I don't think it makes so much sense for you to delve deeper into the ontology and epistemology of realist work. So we'll leave it at that. So with that, I think I spent too much time on the context. With that, we come to realist evaluation. So I will explain to you fairly quickly on a bit on realist evaluation. So it's basically these guys. You may or may not be aware of the name. The names don't matter, but if you are, like I said, pursuing realist evaluation, these seem to be the fathers, so to speak, of Pawson and Tilley, Ray Pawson and Nick Tilley. And in order to be useful for decision makers, evaluations need to indicate what works for whom, in what circumstances, in what respects, over which duration and why, rather than does it work. We have spent enough time developing that. I think that's clear. So yeah, so it's this is something we have already covered. Basically, realist evaluation starts with a theory and ends with a theory. When you are able to formulate some sort of a theory, when you have access to these program designers, when you have access to documents, there is seeming to be some underlying logic guiding an intervention or a policy, there you can use a realist lens. And it ends with a theory, and again a middle range theory, a theory which explains why this program is likely to work for some people and not for others. Yeah, this is basically what a sociologist, a well-known sociologist, you may have heard of him, Merton, defined as middle range theories. So theories that lie between the minor but necessary working hypotheses and the all-inclusive systematic efforts to develop a unified theory that will explain all the observed uniformities of social behavior, social organization and social change. If we say that in states with high literacy levels, decentralization works by improving efficiency. You see, it's a bit context informed. It also tells you a bit which condition is necessary for decentralization to work. So that makes it a middle range theory. And now that is the starting point of the realist evaluation as well. This may have come through a program. Maybe you are evaluating a program which works based on this theory. And then you are then going as an evaluator and trying to unpack, really, is it because of higher education status? So what about places where there is not high literacy? Does it not work there? So this is the deductive logic you start using. So this is it, basically. You start with the program theory, in case you are evaluating a program. If you are evaluating a policy, then you would start with a middle range theory, right? Don't worry, you are starting with a theory basically, like we did here on the board. We start with that logic and why things have to be like this. We make a study design to suit that. All our tools, methods, etc. are based on testing that theory. Is it true that it's working that way? For example, in the case ownership, we said is important for community participation to work. So then your qualitative tools, for example, are going to try and wear that lens. Are people really participating because they sought ownership? And you're trying to check that, test that. And then your data collection, analysis, synthesis, all of them are inspired by that theory. And usually there are multiple cycles. Like in most qualitative inquiries, it's not that you have one theory and you just test that using an armamentarium of tools and large surveys, etc. Like like we discussed before, this becomes somewhat a framework or a guidance for choosing your tools, and you refine it through many cycles, and eventually you come to what we call a middle range theory. So this is really what we already dealt with in response to the question he brought up. So this is the basis of proceeding your evaluation, of going forward in your evaluation, including your analysis. Even when you are analyzing, for example, you are saying, okay, where did self-interest matter? Did it matter in places where the program worked and where it did not work? Is it only occurring where the program worked? So you are saying the mechanism is closely related to the context. It's not that if pay for performance, if you take the example, if pay for performance is based on the fact that people will perform better if more money is paid, that's a very large sort of, it's based on a very large theory of how people behave. You can take that and use it to test where do people tend to behave in that manner. And even where they did, is it due to increased incentive, or is it something else explains this? So even your analytical tools, even the analysis of your interviews, etc., will start looking for what are called as patterns. What co-occurrences of self-interest and positive outcomes, and they become your cases. Okay, so this is the basic frame. This is used both in study design. Even when you do a study design in Realist, you are collecting contextual information, you are collecting mechanism information, very important, because evaluations collect a lot of context information, but do not search for actually why is there this pattern. So the mechanism is at that level. Why is there the pattern we see? And you also collect that data, and that's where it differs a bit from the more classical qualitative approaches, where it's not about testing and seeing is it this mechanism or not. Yeah. So I think this slide sums it up very well. This is a direct verbatim from Pawson and Tilley, and we'll just read that. The basic task of social inquiry is to explain interesting, puzzling, socially significant regularities. Explanation takes the form of positing some underlying mechanism which generates the regularity, and thus consists of propositions about how the interplay between structure and agency has constituted that regularity. You see what we talked here in this whole ontology, epistemology business comes across there, where there is this thing about what regularity you see. That means things happen for some and not for others. That's a regularity. Why is it there? Because there is an underlying interplay between structure and agency, which is where we ought to get to. And within realist investigation, there is also investigation of how the workings of such mechanisms are contingent and conditional, and thus only fired, uses a particularly strong term, but only fired in particular local, historical or institutional contexts. Yeah. So I think that's really sums up the approach a bit. We have already discussed the pay for performance example. So here, this is what they say. The mechanism on which they hinge it is money is a motivator. People work harder if you pay them in function of their performance. But we know that incentives work as long as they are valuable, especially if initial pay is low. More for some than for others. We know that is also individual driven. Only until a ceiling is met, right? Things like that. So the analysis, that was all about study, design, etc. You are collecting data on context, mechanisms and outcomes, and you are trying to look for regularities. In which context are which mechanisms being triggered? So the analysis is a bit what many, actually it's not, retroduction is not special to realist methods. There are many social science and qualitative researchers who use retroduction, which is basically a bit like this. So you are somewhere here, you are trying to explain some demi-regularities or patterns, what I call them. You keep going back into theory and trying to see why is that pattern here. At the same time, you keep going back into the empirical reality and trying to understand, does this theory explain it? If not, you go back and reformulate the theory and then come back and test that here. You see? So it's very iterative. So your study design has also to be iterative. You have to keep going back and forth and check and learn and improve your insights over time. So why is these demi-regularities? we already discussed it, because in the realist worldview we see that what outcome we see is not all in itself. Not for example, I am purposely using ethnography, they may clarify my misconceptions if they choose, but not to say that reality is co-created. What me and the, if I am in a realist mindset, if I am doing an interview, I am not creating knowledge there like the ethnographers would do. What I rather am saying is, there is some knowledge that is coming which is based on a certain worldview, but I take it back and I am trying to ask, why is there this kind of knowledge coming? Is there something deeper about human beings that causes this person in this scenario to say these things? And these are the demi-regularities. So it all started with this guy, just to give you the face behind critical realism, a person of Indian origin called Roy Bhaskar. He passed away recently, 4th December 2014. So he is the one who, let's say, articulated the philosophy of critical realism for the first time. And Pawson and Tilly, the other names that I dropped earlier, are the ones who borrowed from that school of critical realism and made this whole context, mechanism, outcome, and this whole approach and a lens for evaluation. Yeah, so this is a book for those of you who are interested in, is the most recent one called The Science of, it's very simply written. I have a PDF of the first few chapters. I might be putting it up later in the evening, but it's not a recommended reading. I mean, it's a recommended reading, it's not essential. So these are the three layers I was saying. What we see is empirical. What you said, for example, that time, I see that for Ashas it doesn't work, but for doctors, for doctors it doesn't work, for Ashas it works. That's an empirical level. There is an actual level. Why does it not work for Ashas and doctors? That is the actual level. Here is where we are making these CMOs, what context and what mechanisms lead to what outcomes. And finally the real, which is the third level, which is on what kind of human tendencies get triggered when we deliver a certain program, which can be true for anybody, right? So here will be theories of motivation or things like that, which are grander somewhat. I was not sure whether to get into this, but anyway, now that I have displayed this slide. So the fundamental sort of premise for this approach is that there are various pre-existing structures in society, right? Varying structures. By structures I mean any institution, like and by well, I don't like the caste system. I don't mean structures as in directorate or that sort of thing, not organizational structure, for example. So varying pre-existing structures condition behavior in various ways. That's what it starts with. And things like programs, policies, etc., as far as the realist approach is concerned, are trying to create a new interaction, a new change, like what Joe was earlier saying, a change, a difference in these structures and the conditioning. So that could lead to either a reproduction where it does not actually do anything, or it could lead to a transformation where a new way of doing things emerges. But remember, we are talking of the structures changing. In a realist worldview, if we are saying capacity building, for example, it's not about the knowledge and skill injection. We are now asking, what is it that within a hospital that the capacity building program has changed? Has it changed the culture of review meetings in this hospital? If we say Rogi Kalyan Samiti, we are saying what kind of societal structures did the Rogi Kalyan Samiti change so that participatoriness increased? This is the fundamental premise on which this whole thing is based, that there are pre-existing societal structures, and in order for change to happen, these underlying structures need to be changed, right? And while acknowledging that structure is not alone, it also depends on how people also create that structure. Okay, so we will not get into this. We have already talked about this. Mechanism is not a program activity. I think we have hammered this to quite some detail. Mechanism, for example, why did ASHA program work? It worked because it increased community participation. That's an activity. That's not the mechanism for the program to have worked. It needs to work through what kind of changes did it bring about among people? Yeah. Finally, the most important thing is that after the analysis, this whole thing of the teacher-learner process. So where you take your theories and also try and test them. Need to engage with the policymakers, practitioners and participants. This need to test. Is it true that you thought your program will work because it will improve the self-confidence of managers in applying the skills? That could be your middle range theory that you arrived at, that your capacity building program improves the confidence with which managers can apply their skills. So then you make those middle range theories and you go back and try and ask, is it true? And you learn more. And people may say, no, not really, I don't feel more confident, but they removed barriers for me. Now with the training, people recognize me as a manager. I think that works. So, so this is very much encouraged. So that's the iterative nature. So even after you end with the theory, it's good to go and verify it, validate it with your thing. I think we'll end it at this. It's been